They thought he was just another visitor, but when a file was opened, the entire cemetery fell silent. The morning fog still lingered over Grayford Hill Cemetery, a place where time seemed slower, where rows of headstones stretched across the hill like silent soldiers of memory. The ground was damp, the grass slick with dew, and the iron gate creaked each time someone passed through. Most visitors came quickly. They brought flowers, whispered prayers, and left as soon as the chill air bit into their coats. But on that Thursday morning, someone stood out. He was tall, though age had bent his shoulders. His coat was long, worn, and his boots scuffed from decades of use. His face bore the deep lines of 78 winters, and his eyes, though shadowed under a cap, were sharp, deliberate. Marcus Hale didn't bring flowers. He didn't carry a Bible. He only carried silence. The cemetery groundskeeper, Ben Carter, noticed him. He had seen plenty of old-timers wandering the cemetery, tracing names they once knew, whispering stories no one else remembered. But there was something different about this man. Hale moved with purpose, straight through the cemetery until he reached an old headstone, weathered and gray, half covered in moss. Most people passed by without a glance. The name had faded to near obscurity. Lieutenant Elias Arden, U.S. Navy, 1945 to 1971. Marcus stopped. He folded his arms and stared. For 1 full hour, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood guard at a grave no one else visited anymore. Visitors glanced at him with mild curiosity, then looked away. To them, he was just another forgotten man in a forgotten place. But to Marcus Hale, that stone wasn't just a grave. It was the weight of a promise that had never left his shoulders. Later that afternoon, the cemetery filled again. A small military funeral was held for a young sailor who had died overseas. A flag-draped casket rested near the eastern fence, surrounded by grieving family, uniformed pallbearers, and townsfolk who gathered in solemn respect. The pastor, Reverend Naomi Brooks, spoke softly of duty and sacrifice, her voice rising and falling with the cadence of prayer. At the back, under the shade of a towering oak, Marcus Hale stood alone. He didn't step forward. He didn't join the crowd. But his posture never wavered, and his eyes never strayed from the ceremony. Among those present was Lieutenant Avery Cole, a young officer stationed at Naval Amphibious Base, Mason's Point, about 40 minutes away. Cole noticed the old man almost immediately. There was something in the way Hale stood, rigid but not stiff, composed but not casual, not like a mourner, more like a sentinel. When the rifles fired their salute and the bugler played taps, Cole looked toward the oak again. Hale hadn't moved. That evening, curiosity gnawed at Lieutenant Cole. Back at the base, he logged into the restricted archives, an officer's privilege, though limited. He wasn't looking for classified operations, just old personnel notes that might explain who the silent visitor was. He searched through burial records linked to Grayford Hill Cemetery. One entry caught his eye, Lieutenant Elias Arden. The file was thin, barely more than a page. Arden had gone missing during a covert operation in Laos, 1971. Official status, KIA/MIA. Body recovered years later under disputed circumstances, buried in Grayford. But in the corner of the file was a notation, scribbled decades ago. Last seen with Captain Marcus Hale. Survived. Cole froze. Marcus Hale. The name was like a ghost pulled from the margins of history. There was no detailed record, no service number, no awards listed. Just the name and the realization. The man in the cemetery wasn't just another visitor. He was the last witness to a soldier whose story had been buried deeper than his grave. The following Thursday, Marcus returned. Same time, same path, same grave. But this time, Lieutenant Cole was waiting. He approached slowly, respectful, boots crunching against gravel. "Sir," he said quietly. Marcus didn't turn. Cole tried again. "Are you, Captain Marcus Hale?" A long silence stretched between them. Finally the old man spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "I was." A long time ago. Cole swallowed. Lieutenant Elias Arden. You knew him. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't look away from the headstone. Knew him? He saved me. And no one ever asked what that cost. Cole's throat went dry. He wanted to ask more, but something in the man's presence silenced him. It wasn't fear. It was reverence. Hale wasn't telling a story. He was bearing a weight. When Cole returned to the base, he couldn't keep it to himself. Word spread quietly among a few trusted officers. By the next week, more uniforms appeared in Grayford. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. The cemetery was busier than usual, families visiting, children leaving flowers, a few veterans standing together in quiet memory. Marcus Hale was at his usual place, arms crossed, eyes locked on Arden's headstone. Then Lieutenant Cole arrived, this time with a folder in his hand. He stood a few feet away and read aloud. Lieutenant Elias Arden. Missing in action, Laos, 1971. Last seen with Captain Marcus Hale. Survived. The words cut through the air like thunder. People nearby stopped. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. For decades, Arden's sacrifice had been a forgotten footnote. But in that moment, the truth hung over the cemetery, like a bell tolling across the valley, and the crowd, almost instinctively, fell silent. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. They all just looked at the man beside the grave. Marcus Hale didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was his voice, and it said more than any eulogy ever could. Word spread through Grayford like wildfire. The stranger at the cemetery isn't just anyone. He's Captain Marcus Hale. The Grayford Gazette ran a quiet article, not sensational, just respectful. The Silent Visitor. A captain's vigil for his fallen brother. At the Harbor Light Diner, whispers turned to reverent hush whenever his name was mentioned. Veterans who had once hidden their scars now stood a little taller. Teenagers who had laughed at old war stories suddenly wanted to know more. The sheriff, Lila Thompson, made it clear, no one disturbs him. Not on my watch. But Marcus didn't come for attention. He still arrived alone, still stood silently, still left without a word. Weeks passed. Then one morning, the cemetery groundskeeper, Ben Carter, noticed something new. A small brass plaque had been bolted to the fence line near Arden's grave. The engraving was simple. Behind the silence, remember them. No one knew who had placed it there, but when Marcus saw it, he paused. His hand brushed over the metal, and for the first time, his eyes closed. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But the weight on his shoulders seemed to ease just for a moment. Then, one Thursday, Marcus Hale didn't come. The grave stood alone, the brass plaque gleaming faintly in the morning sun. Visitors noticed. Some left flowers. Others straightened their backs as they passed, as if instinctively honoring the absence of a man they barely knew. Days turned into weeks. The old Ford pickup never appeared again by the fence line. But something had changed. Every Thursday, recruits from Mason's Point started coming in small groups. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't wear full dress. They just stood where Marcus used to stand, silent, arms folded, eyes fixed on Arden's grave. The silence lived on. Months later, the Grayford Public Library hosted a small exhibit. Not grand, not crowded, just a single glass case containing a faded photograph of Elias Arden, a service cap once worn by Marcus Hale, and a plaque inscribed with words that had become Grayford's quiet oath. Some men teach with speeches, others with silence. Remember them both. Visitors came and went, but none left unmoved, because the story of Marcus Hale and Elias Arden wasn't about medals or records or glory. It was about a promise carried in silence, a promise that even in death, loyalty doesn't fade. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone whose silence carried more than words ever could? Tell us in the comments. Share their name. Share their memory. Because stories like these deserve to be remembered. And if this one touched your heart, subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you human stories that matter, Stories of respect, loyalty, and the quiet kind of courage that still shapes the world today. Thank you for watching.